it's Jennifer from Flux. In this video, I'm going to show you how to crochet this beautiful Frozen Forest Button Shawl. This is a really easy to crochet shawl. We're going to be doing a series of double crochet rows and puff stitch rows, and it gives it some beautiful texture without really competing with the variegated yarn that I've used. Now, I've used variegated yarn, but you can really use any yarn you like. This would look equally beautiful in a solid color, self-striping yarn, etc. And then what we're going to do is make the whole shawl, and then we have some really pretty buttons that we're going to add. You can really add any button you like. I chose a large wood button because I thought it looked very nice with this yarn, but we're going to learn how to also make some button loops to accommodate these large buttons, and I'm going to show you how to do that, and we're going to sew the buttons on. And this can be worn in a variety of ways. You can button it closed like I have here. You could wear it completely unbuttoned and wear it like a traditional shawl, or you could just like unbutton a button or two and wear it kind of open like a little collar. So it's really a very versatile piece, and the buttons really help keep your shawl on while you're wearing it, okay? So we're going to go through the whole thing together. Now the finished piece, this is customizable. You can change the width and the length if you want, but if you want to replicate my dimensions, the length of this, when it's unbuttoned and opened up, is 45 inches long, and then the width of our piece is 14 inches wide, okay? So let's get started. For this project, you'll need a pair of scissors, a tapestry needle, a ruler or tape measure will be super handy if you'd like to change the width or the length of your project. I'm going to show you how to do both of those things using multiples and additional rows. And we're going to be using a 5mm H crochet hook. This is my Furls Odyssey in this beautiful navy color. I can put the link down below if you'd like to get one for yourself. We're going to be using 3 buttons for this project. The final row of our project will have a series of buttonhole loops. So you'll need some buttons if you choose to make yours buttoned. You don't have to. You can just make a traditional shawl if you like. But these are about 1.5 inches wide. I have 3 of them. These are, if you're looking for the same ones, because I really like them with this yarn. It looks really pretty. These are coconut wood, and they're pretty inexpensive at the craft store, and they have a lot of pretty texture and a nice neutral color. Again, these are 1.5 inches wide. They're pretty large. So if you'd like to get some for yourself, you can find them at the craft store. And as a side note, they don't have to be this exact size. The buttonholes that we're going to be making, the last row of our piece, are just a series of chains just to make a loop. So you can really add or subtract chains. If your buttons are smaller, you would make less chains for a smaller loop, and so forth. So 3 buttons though, any style or size that complements your yarn. So let's talk about the yarn now. This is a gigantic yarn cake, as you can see. This yarn is called Winter Glow. This is a yarn from Hobie, and I'm just going to take the label off to show you. You can see the colors on the top now since I've taken the label off. Very pretty, just like a really soft kind of nice variegated yarn. This is half wool, half acrylic, and it does recommend the H crochet hook that we are going to be using. And this cake, as like I mentioned before, is humongous. This is 765 yards. So if you need to substitute yarn, look for a yarn that is a 4 medium on the yarn weight scale. This is a DK weight yarn, and it does recommend the H crochet hook, the 5mm H crochet hook that we'll be using. So just look for a DK weight yarn that recommends the H crochet hook, and you'll be just fine. But we're going to use this yarn cake. And as a side note, if you're wondering, this is color number 21, and I'll put the link down below for this yarn as well. Okay, I have my yarn and my hook, and we're ready to go. This is a pretty easy pattern. It's just 2 rows that we'll be doing, and we'll be repeating. We'll do like a starting row and then rows 2 and 3, and we'll repeat rows 2 and 3 for the rest of the project. So pretty easy. We're going to begin with our starting chain. Now our starting chain is a multiple of 2 plus 4. So if you're not familiar with that concept, to establish the width of your piece, you're going to work in groups of 2. So 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 until you get about the width that you want, and then add 4 more chains onto that. So our starting chain is going to be 64 chains, but just know if you need to change the width of that, if you are using different yarn or want to kind of play around with the sizing, it is a multiple of 2 plus 4 for this stitch sequence, okay? So again, we're going to do a starting chain of 64. So what we want to do is put a slip knot on our hook to begin. Wrap the yarn around your fingers to make a loop, bring the yarn behind the loop, reach in with your hook, bring up that loop, and tighten. Next, what we're going to do is our starting chain, and again, it's 64. So to make a chain, wrap the yarn around the hook and bring it through the loop. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 60, 61, 62, 63, and 64. So here is our starting chain, and this will give you a good sense of the width, okay? So again, if you need to change it, if you want to shrink it down a little bit, just stay in that guideline of the 2 plus 4 multiple, okay? So let's move on to row 1. Row 1 is kind of the row that's going to set us up, okay? So in the 4th chain from the hook, what we're going to do is work a double crochet, chain 1. So this loop here does not count. So in the 4th chain from the hook, go 1, 2, 3, and 4, that 4th chain from the hook, we're going to work a double crochet, chain 1. So to make a double crochet, wrap the yarn around the hook, insert the hook into that chain, bring up a loop. You'll have 3 loops on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the first 2 loops. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through the last 2 loops. Then we're going to chain 1. Next, we're going to skip a chain, and in the chain after that, we're going to do the same thing. So skip the next chain, and in the chain after that, work a double crochet, chain 1. Skip the next chain, and the chain after that, do the same thing. We're going to be doing this all the way across. So in that chain, double crochet, chain 1. Skip the next chain, and the chain after that, double crochet, chain 1. All right, let's do this a few more times together, and then we can kind of like finish off the row. Skip the next chain, and the chain after that, double crochet, chain 1. Skip the next chain, and the chain after that, double crochet, chain 1. Skip the next chain, in the chain after that, double crochet, chain 1. Okay, so we're going to keep going till we get towards the end of this row, and then when we get almost to the end of row 1, we'll rejoin and I'll show you how to finish it up. So just keep going with the same sequence. So skip the next chain, and in the chain after that, double crochet, chain 1. Just keep doing that all the way across. And then when you get towards the end of the row, we'll rejoin, and I'll show you how to finish off row 1 and start on row 2. Just coming up to the end of the row, working those last few double crochets. All right, so we are at the end. Now, at the end, when you have just 2 chains left, what you're going to do is skip the next chain, and then that very last chain, work a double crochet. And that's how you finish row 1, okay? So you should have a nice little row of double crochets. It almost looks like a little ladder at this point, okay? So now we're going to move on to row 2. Row 2 is an exciting row because it is the row where we're going to make our puff stitches, which will give it nice, pretty texture, okay? So what we're going to do for row 2 is chain 3, 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to turn our work. Then what we're going to do is work a puff stitch, chain 1, into each double crochet across the row, okay? So all these double crochets we did, in each one, we're going to work a puff stitch, chain 1. Now, if you're not familiar with the puff stitch, I'm going to show you how to do it. So this first double crochet that we come to, we're going to wrap the yarn around the hook, insert it into that stitch, so the very top of that double crochet, and we're going to bring up a loop. You're going to have 3 loops on the hook, and I'm going to zoom in just a tiny bit more so you can see better. Then we're going to wrap the yarn around the hook again, reinsert it back into that same stitch, and bring up a loop. You're now going to have 5 loops on the hook. Wrap the yarn around the hook, reinsert it back into that stitch one more time, and bring up a loop. Now you'll have 7 loops on the hook. Wrap the yarn around the hook, bring it through all 7 loops, and then what you're going to do is work a chain 1 to kind of close the top of that stitch off. So go ahead and chain 1, okay? And that is how you work the puff stitch. And as you can see, it sort of like caps the top of that double crochet, okay? So what we're going to do is do this all the way across. Let's do a few more together, and then we'll kind of depart and do our own thing. Okay, go into the next stitch from the previous row, and we're going to wrap yarn around hook, insert it into that stitch, and bring up a loop. 3 loops are on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, insert it into the same stitch, and bring up a loop. 5 loops are on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, reinsert it back into that stitch again, bring up a loop. 7 loops are on the hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through all 7 loops, and chain 1. Now we have our 2 puff stitches. Very pretty. Okay, next stitch. Yarn around hook, insert it into the next stitch and bring up a loop. 3 loops. Yarn around hook, insert it into the stitch, bring up a loop. 5 loops. Yarn around hook, reinsert it back into that stitch and bring up a loop. 7 loops are on the hook. Yarn around hook, bring it through all 7 loops, and chain 1. And that's all. All right, let's do 1 or 2 more, and then we'll kind of depart and do our own thing and finish row 2. All right, let's move a little faster this time. All right, yarn around hook, bring up a loop, 3 loops, 5 loops, 7 loops, yarn around hook, bring it through all 7 loops. I just wanted to show you a little trick I do sometimes when you're bringing your hook through a bunch of loops like this, I like to kind of grab the bottom of all those loops, and if you notice, not as exaggerated as I'm doing it now, but I kind of give it a little tug, and it kind of opens them up a little bit so I can bring my hook through and chain 1. I'll show you that one more time. Yarn around hook, bring up a loop, 3 loops, 5 loops, 7 loops, yarn around hook, bring it through all 7 loops, and chain 1. All right, so 3 loops, 5 loops, 7 loops, kind of give it a little tug, bring it through all 7 loops, and chain 1, okay? So we're just going to work this all the way across, and then when we rejoin, I'm going to show you how to finish row 2, and we'll move on to row 3. Okay, just coming up to the end of row 2, I'm going to work my last puff stitch. Here's our double crochet that we had at the end of the row. So 3 loops, 5 loops, 7 loops, bring it through all 7 loops, and chain 1. Okay, so to finish the row, what we're going to do is just work a double crochet in the topmost chain of our turning chain, okay? So you can see it kind of curves out a little bit. Just look for that topmost chain and work a double crochet right into that, okay? So row 2 is complete, and you can see we have some beautiful texture here, and it's like starting to change color, so it's really interesting to look at. All right, so let's work on row 3. That's our final row that we're going to learn, and then you can just kind of take off and keep repeating rows 2 and 3. So let's do row 3 next. Once again, we're going to chain 3. 1, 2, 3, and turn our work. Then what we're going to do is we're going to work a double crochet chain 1 into each one of these puff stitches. So sometimes if you're not used to working into puff stitches, sometimes you need to kind of like pick it up a little bit. And if you pick it up, you can sort of see a little loop at the top. I'm trying to angle it so you can see a little bit of light coming through there. You can see a little loop at the top of that puff stitch. So what we're going to do, right in the top of that puff stitch, work a double crochet. So I'm just going to go right in there, work my double crochet, and then a chain 1. Let's do that a couple more times. Go right into that top little loop of our puff stitch and work a double crochet, chain 1. Next stitch, double crochet, chain 1. Okay, and we're just going to do this all the way across. Just look for that little loop in the top of your puff stitch, okay? You can see that one a little bit better. That little loop right in the top there, okay? So just keep working this across, and when we rejoin, I'm going to show you how to finish off row 3, And then you'll be all set to work on your entire wrap all by yourself. All right, just coming up to the end of row 3, working that double crochet, chain 1. Now to finish row 3, what we're going to do is work a double crochet in the topmost chain of our turning chain once again. Okay, so just work a double crochet. Make sure you grab 2 loops on that. So I have 2 loops on my hook. If you just grab 1 loop, it could kind of pull it and not look as nice. Okay, so just work your double crochet in that topmost turning chain. And then row 3 is complete. So what you're going to do, let me just zoom out so you can see a little bit better. What you're going to do to keep working on your project is to just keep repeating rows 2 and 3, 2 and 3 over and over and over again until your shawl is as long as you would like it to be. So I'm going to keep going with my rows, and you can kind of see, I'm going to straighten this out a little bit. You can kind of see already we have some lovely texture, and the colors are playing out really beautifully as well. So keep going with rows 2 and 3, and we'll rejoin in just a minute, and we're going to learn how to do the next part of our project. Now, as you're working through, if you're doing the row of buttonholes to add onto the end, just make sure as you're working through your yarn, whatever yarn you are using, just make sure that you save yourself enough yarn to work that last row, and a couple, maybe like a yard or so, to sew the buttons on, because you want a matching piece of yarn to do that, okay? So just make sure you reserve a little bit of yarn for that last row that I'm going to show you, and to sew a little bit of yarn to sew the buttons on as well. So keep going with rows 2 and 3, and we'll rejoin in just a minute. Okay, we're just coming up to the very last row here. I'm working that last double crochet into that last puff stitch, and then I'm going to work 1 more double crochet in the top of that turning chain. And now our piece is mostly complete. We just need to add 1 more row because we're going to be creating some buttonholes for our lovely buttons that we talked about earlier in the video. So as you can see, the buttons I'm using are pretty big, and they're a little bit too big to fit. You could, if you use smaller buttons, you could use some of these decorative holes as buttonholes, but I'm going to show you how to do a row if you're using large buttons like me. I really liked the wood with this particular yarn. So what we need to do is mark our spot. So I'm going to kind of move my hook out of the way. I'm not going to cut the yarn or fasten off or anything like that, but I'm going to just move my hook out of the way, because what we want to do is we need to space these. We're going to sew the buttons to the other end, but we just want to kind of figure out a placement for, we're going to be creating some loops out of chains. So we want to make sure they're equally apart from one another. Okay, so I have 3 stitch markers here. So what we're going to do is I am going to, you can measure it and create 3 areas. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold my piece in half, and I'm going to locate the very middle of my piece that way. And so it's right in this stitch right here. And then, so we have a button here, and then I'm going to just kind of eyeball this. I don't want them to be really close to the edge here, but I'm gonna kind of use these puff stitches as a guideline. So I have 3 puffs in. So if we look at these kind of like ladder rungs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll do the 6th stitch in, and then we can do the same thing. So if I lay it down, it's gonna kind of be where those first 3 puff stitches are, and I'm gonna go that 6th stitch in, or the ladder rung rather. 1, we can just count the posts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now, if you want to align yours a little bit differently based on the buttons that you have, definitely feel free to do that, okay? So now we have marked where our little button loops are going to be. I keep saying button holes, but they're actually be little loops, because they're going to need to be big enough to like swing around these buttons, okay? So let's zoom back in. And for our last row, what we're going to do is we're going to put our hook back in there. We kind of got it out of the way for a minute. And we're going to chain 1, and we're going to turn. We're going to be working some single crochets across. Okay? So what you want to do is work a single crochet in this very first stitch that you see. You can see it's like a hole at the top. So insert the hook into that very first stitch, bring up a loop, wrap yarn around hook, bring it through both loops. Now work a single crochet in that space. Work a single crochet into the stitch. And we're just going to do this all the way across until we come to that first stitch marker, okay? So work a single crochet in each stitch and then each space all the way across, okay? So I'm coming up to my stitch marker, working in each stitch, working in each space, just like that. And now we're at our stitch marker. So what we want to do is you can just pop that stitch marker out just to give yourself a little bit more space. Work a single crochet into that stitch. Okay, and now we're going to make our loop. I'm going to chain 10 for mine. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Now, if you're using the same size button as me, try chaining 10. If you have a different size, it's fine. What you can do is kind of check your work before you kind of commit to it. So go back down into that same stitch and work another single crochet, and then kind of scoot your hook out of the way, and you're going to grab your button, and you're just going to make sure that your button can slip through. You don't want it to be too loose. You don't want it to be, whoops, you don't want it to be too snug. You want it to just be able to just easily pass through without too much looseness, okay? So this seems just about right. If you have a different size button, try experimenting with the chains, okay? So we can leave our stitch marker aside now. We're done with that. And then we're just going to keep continuing across, working a single crochet in each stitch and each space across. So work a single crochet, all the way across until we get to the next stitch marker. And then we're going to do the same thing. Okay, here we are at our next stitch marker. So we're just going to do the same thing we did before. In that stitch, work a single crochet. We can slide that out of the way, and then chain 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Go back into that same stitch, work a single crochet, and then we can continue on to the final stitch marker. Okay, so again, we're just working a single crochet in each stitch and each space across. Okay, so just continue across, working your single crochets. All right, coming up to the third and final stitch marker, we can pop that out. I wanted to mention as a side note, if you don't have stitch markers, you could use a scrap piece of yarn or something like that instead. It's totally fine. Okay, and now we're going to work into a single crochet into that stitch where our stitch marker was. Chain 10, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Back down into that same stitch, work your single crochet. And once again, work a single crochet in each stitch and each space across. Just till you get to the end. And then what we're going to do is, okay, so here's our last stitch. And then we're just going to work a single crochet into that topmost chain of our turning chain just to finish off the row, just like that. Okay, so now we can cut the yarn and fasten off. And we're ready to do our buttons. Now, our buttons are going to be sewn in a certain way, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So let's zoom way out here. And I'll scoot some of this over. All right, so what we need to do is, now you may have a favorite side. With puff stitches, I do think that there is a nicer looking side. I think it's this side, the side that faced you while you worked the puff stitch rows. I think those look a little bit nicer, but it's up to you. So what we want to do is we need to position this to get it ready to sew our buttons. So we're going to have our loops, our buttonhole loops on the left here. I'm just going to zoom out a tiny bit more, and we're going to kind of fold that in, and we're going to fold the other edge in, okay? Now, this will be buttoned. So this was the bottom edge where we began our project. We're going to sew them to the side though, okay? Because when you wear it, now let me just get it all kind of straightened out here. When you wear it, it will make this lovely kind of point down the front of you as you wear it, okay? So we just need to kind of fiddle with it a little bit and get it kind of straightened out. Make sure the outside is facing out when you do this. And then this side can come in here. So using this as a guideline, you can kind of see the shape here. So using our loops as a guideline, we're ready to sew our buttons, okay? So what we want to do is, now if you sew your buttons too close to the edge, I would just want to show you when you put them through the loop, I'm just going to like pretend it's sewn on here. When you put them through the loop, you're going to have this like gap when you wear it. Let me get my hand under here so you can see. You're going to have this like gap, okay? So you kind of want to overlap it a little bit. So bring it up over that edge just a little bit before you sew your buttons on, okay? So we're going to lay our buttons down right where our buttonhole loops are, just like that. And now we want to get a scrap piece of yarn and use the same yarn that you used for your project because it'll match and it'll look the nicest. And you can kind of, because this is variegated, you can kind of pull out a little bit of yarn to get the color that you want. I like this kind of muted blue. And before you start sewing your buttons, make sure that your needle can easily pass through the holes, okay? So I'm going to lay my buttons down where I want them, and I'm going to just try to keep everything nice and flat while I work. I also wanted to mention, when you sew this, make sure this edge and this edge are going to kind of line up, okay? That'll look nice and neat when you wear it, okay? So let's thread our needle. So we're going to sort of fold this back, but just keep it in the same spot. I've threaded my needle, and I'm going to kind of tack it down with my hand, and then we're going to come up from the bottom, or the back rather, and go in one buttonhole here, and pull it almost all the way through. You need to be able to tie the back. And then through the bottom, back down, and then just do this a couple of times so it's nice and secure. Anytime you make a wearable like this, and you have buttons and different things that hold it together, you want to make sure it's very, very strong because, you know, as you wear it, it will put stress on the buttons and the loops. So you want everything to be very strong. Okay, so then what we're going to do is flip this over carefully, trying not to disturb these other buttons here because we've kind of placed them. If they move, you can just realign them. And then we're just going to tie this. Don't need to pull it too tight because we don't want to break the yarn. But we just want to tie a couple of strong knots. And then while you have your tapestry needle handy, what we're going to do is thread our needle again and then just sort of weave in this end. Just keep it nice and neat. This is a, you know, it has some decorative holes in it. So we want to just try to keep everything nice and neat. If we just snipped the back of them, we may be able to see those through the decorative holes. So I am going to weave them so I have a little bit more control over things showing from the other side, okay? So I'm just going to tuck those little tails in real quick. And this first one is ready. Now see how I've come in a little bit? That's what we want. Okay, so go back down with your piece, and then you can just kind of practice with your button loop, okay? And it looks great. Everything looks really, really good. Now I have a couple of ends to weave in still, but, and as you can see, if it pulls a little bit, it's gonna just stay in place and not create any gaps. You're gonna have a little bit of overlap, which is what we want. Okay, so just repeat for your other two buttons, and then we'll rejoin in just a minute. Okay, all of our buttons have been sewn on, and you can see this loop just works beautifully to hold it all together. The last thing we need to do is just weave a few ends in. So grab your tapestry needle, and now that we have an inside and an outside, what we're going to do is I kind of opened it up a little bit. You may have a couple of ends, like I do, and we're just going to kind of weave them along these inside loops, okay? I like to go in one direction with my tail, and then come back in the other direction just to kind of lock everything into place. So just go back in the other direction with your tail, and then you can just give it a little snip. Okay? Okay, all of our ends have been woven in and it looks great. Now I've taken a few pictures and put them on the blog of different ways you can wear this. You can wear this completely buttoned up. You can kind of unbutton one and make it sort of like a collar. It's totally up to you. You could actually wear it unbuttoned all the way and just wear it like a traditional shawl as well. So that is how you crochet the Frozen Forest Button Shawl. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure and click the subscribe button to get all the latest Fiber Flux video updates. Thanks again.